Item 6D is citywide. It's an adoption of a new historic preservation ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Would the staff like to report?
Yes, thank you. Chair Ikezi, members of the commission, what's our last item for the evening for other public hearings is the consideration of the historic preservation ordinance. And make sure I got the right one. The historic preservation ordinance is proposed as a new chapter in the city's zoning code. It would bring Santa Clara in line with other communities who have adopted preservation ordinances. And just as a side note, the city is a certified local government, and that is a designation that's received under the state of California for cities and communities participating in a certain level of preservation activities, and that's such as establishing a board or commission that looks at historic properties. It usually involves regulation. You can offer the Mills Act. In this case, the city did become a certified local government before the requirement for a preservation ordinance took place, but we are one of the last to actually go forward and try to adopt one. So we are looking forward to bringing the city in line with, modern practices. So the proposed ordinance would codify the procedures and provide certainty to the public and the city staff. This is some of the background. This started with an ad hoc committee prior to 2014. Then we had staff direction to modify the draft ordinance. After the first draft was presented, that was probably the most progressive version of it. And so there was some concern about the overreach and also the lack of incentivizing preservation in the community and having more of a Santa Clara approach. So it was revised. We did refer that to the State Office of Historic Preservation and went through a couple rounds of that and then received final comments. After that, we drafted the ordinance in its final form for city council consideration. And they did give us a little bit more direction, and one was to include referral of properties that are within 100 feet of a property that's actually on the inventory. That's one that's been evaluated and has been nominated and has support by the property owner on the list. That it would also, if there's development surrounding those properties that are on the inventory, anything within 100 feet of that property would be referred to the HLC or go through the hearing process if it falls in a discretionary format, such as going to architectural committee. So with those changes, you have the most current draft that will be sending the final version of it that'll be going forward to the city council. The purpose of the ordinance is to identify significant properties. The city council adopted criteria for evaluating local resources in 2004 that was developed by the Historic Preservation Historical and Landmarks Commission, and it was forwarded and supported. And so we've been evaluating properties based upon that criteria at the local level for some time. That's incorporated in there, and it sets forth the actual procedure for designation of properties to add to the inventory. It'll also create establish processes for minor maintenance, minor additions to changes, and then major changes, a review process. So there's 3 tiers in the ordinance, and it simplifies it for everybody involved, city staff and the public. The preservation ordinance clarifies the roles and process related to changes to those properties, as I mentioned. It sets procedures for review of those properties. We do use the Secretary of the Interior standards for the level of changes and how they're supposed to be done. That's conserving significant features. It's preserving rather than replacing whenever possible. And it is making very good choices in terms of design, which is, much of it is consistent with our residential design guidelines. So there isn't that much of a departure. And then also review by HLC of applications of the ordinance is restricted to historic resource inventory properties only. So anything that's not currently evaluated, it would not be going for them. So it's a much narrower list of properties. And demolitions, if they're potentially qualified structures, they still would have a backstop that the Director of Community Development would be discerning whether or not they should be referred or have an evaluation. So we still have that measure in place. And demolitions of major structures would go through the environmental review process. This shows you our surrounding communities that have preservation ordinances. And based on those revisions that we made to the ordinance to incorporate the direction from City Council, the ordinance, that was the only minor change that was made from the version that the City Council saw that they requested. We are now moving forward with the adoption. So the version that you see here is what would get adopted if City Council approves it. So we are seeking your review and recommendation to forward to City Council, and we will be looking to return to Council for a pass to print in October of this year. And with that, I'll conclude and answer any questions you have.
Actually, I have a question for Xander.
Thank you. Commissioner Jane.
I have a question for Xander. I live in a home that is listed in the general plan as a historic home, and I have currently applied for Mills Act. So should I be recusing myself?
Can I get a ballpark how many properties are on the historic resource inventory? Is it?
I think there's somewhere between 350 and 400.
Normally, a zoning ordinance, the public generally accepts and applies because it applies to the whole city. But in your case, you may not be similarly situated because not a significant segment of the population is affected in the same way as you. I would have to do some math to figure out whether or not the requisite percentage is met, but offhand, off the cuff, I'm going to recommend you abstain.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I hate to tell anyone they can't participate, but yeah, you can participate as a member of the public, yeah.
Okay, do we still have a quorum?
You do?
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. I'd like to disclose that I reached out to some of the members from the original Preservation Committee and to let them know that we're going to have this hearing. Nobody showed up, but one of them expressed the support for any preservation ordinance. Okay. Any questions for the staff?
I do.
Commissioner O'Halloran.
Yes, I know we've gone through this quite a bit over years, so I just wanted to get a clarification in my own mind as to what it is. The property tax exemption, is that part of the ordinance as to what it is, the amount?
No, it is not included in the ordinance. That's the Mills Act agreements, and those are a separate application that you would file. The only relationship to this ordinance is that it identifies historic resource inventory properties. You have to be on that list, and if you're not, you have to go through the nomination procedure and get approved before you can apply for that Mills Act agreement. And that's where the tax, property tax reduction occurs through that
And
agreement.
who does that? That's the city that does that?
It's the county assessor's office.
And currently, we just have individual units. We don't have any actual zone that is
Right.
historic, right?
We have no districts, and we do not have any zoning overlays other than HT properties. That would be, there's a few of those.
What would be the process if you were on that list that you wanted to get off it because you wanted to do something else?
There is a provision in the ordinance that talks about, basically, we used to call it delisting. And so it is a fairly tough bar to meet, because if there was qualifying information in here that supported the nomination, you have, under CEQA, it says you have to have preponderance of the evidence to the contrary. So if the building burned down, certainly, that's a reason to take it off.
Well,
And
that's
you- and
again,
you
just
were-
for
you were to
clarification in
rebuild,
my
yeah.
mind, it is doable. You can do it.
You can do it, it's just that it's a difficult test to make, because you'd have to find evidence that would support reverse the decision. But that provision, that process is in the ordinance.
And the other, could we now seek zoning for a area? I'm thinking of the Maywood neighborhood that got into the issue about preserving their property. Could they ask for that zoning even though people would be grandfathered in to this house?
Okay, well, it's not a zoning designation. This ordinance just gives the provisions for how you treat properties when there's changes proposed to them, or it's in the nomination. What you're talking about is creating a historic district. And there isn't a provision in here for districts, because the council indicated that each individual property would have to have its own separate designation as a historic property. If you were to aggregate those, essentially you'd have a contiguous area, and that essentially would create a district. Or the council can augment the ordinance later on and add provisions for a district.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
That clears. Thanks.
Commissioner Chahal.
Okay, finally, this is being approved, sort of, right? I was part of that committee.
Recommended.
Yeah. So I know this was sent to state commission. Did they make any major changes to our recommendations?
Yes, actually, I wouldn't say major. They were more clarifications. So they had a lot of questions because they hadn't seen it before and didn't know the history. So a lot of it was a response to the comments. And actually, I outlined in the agenda report that went to City Council, all of the responses to the state's questions were responded to line by line. And some of it had to do with that the council either wasn't supportive of a particular approach. Others say when there was a conflict, we resolved those internal conflicts in the ordinance. So it was more along that line. But they had asked for some more, let's say they recommended a little bit more of a stringent version, but again, we explained that there wasn't that level of support from the council, so that it was restructured a different way to accomplish the same thing.
Okay. And I know there were some issues related to CCR, whatever they call, for a particular neighborhood, like Maywood or something. What happens in that case, like if a local neighborhood defines itself as a historic neighborhood and our ordinance does not have a definition for a geographical area definition of an ordinance, historic district, how do we resolve that?
Oh, I think we conveyed at the time to some of the people in the Maywood, the other tracks where they were the Eichler-esque homes, that their individuals, CCNRs, or their, other restrictions on their property, that they had an architectural committee, that, individuals cannot create their own. We have our attorney can comment on this, but those things that were adopted as part of a subdivision are not enforceable by this. The city's not going to enforce them. And we're not going to recognize those in terms of usurping the city's regulations. So we go by this Santa Clara City Code, we go by the charter. That's what it regulates. That's the only regulation that we recognize in addressing properties. If they want to voluntarily assume these and the owners want to, agree to those terms, that's something for them to work out. So the city council indicated that unless you're a surveyed property and you go through a nomination process and get our inventory, we're not going to treat the preservation of those features that they think make those properties distinct. We're not going to enforce those things. So yes, we have design guidelines. We address those, the general form and shape and design of those homes, but I think they're going to be treated a little bit more optionally now. There's something to look at if somebody wants to do, but to try to enforce their protection as a historical style, that is not going to be, that's not considered as part of this ordinance. So again, you'd have to go through the nomination process and get it recognized as a historically significant architectural style.
Okay. And if I may recall, I think city of Sunnyvale designated particular street after majority of the residents came forward to preserve that particular street. Do we have any of that provision in our ordinance or within historical preservation or outside of historical preservation? Can somebody in our city do the similar thing as it happened in Sunnyvale?
The only avenue we'd have right now is the HT zoning district. And that would be an overlay zoning district on a geographic, it could be on one property, I suppose it could be on multiple properties. Or, like I had mentioned previously, if the council wants to add language later on, because we're supposed to revisit the ordinance once it's in effect, if there's interest in districts, we can come back and create provisions for nominating of districts. But again, most of the times, the ordinances require usually between 65 and 75% neighborhood approval to create a district. And so that's fairly standard. Now, whether the council would support anything other than 100%, we don't know. Right now, it's indicated that it needs to be every person except the, the label or the classification or, having their property included, because their concern was that they want to respect the property rights and individual feelings of those property owners.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a question about the properties not listed on the HRI. And it says, 1, upon receiving the application for a demolition permit for a property not listed on the HRI, the Community Development Department shall make a determination as to whether an application should be referred to the HLC and City Council. Are there any criteria for whether to make that referral?
I think generally speaking, if one, we do have actually in our permit tracking system, a list of all properties that were, at the time we did it, it was at least 50 years of age. And so they're flagged on our system. And so they're supposed to be looked at if there is a demolition request. So there was already say a citywide survey, what we call a windshield survey, to try to identify as many properties as possible. And part of this was based upon the original survey that was done of the city to include potential properties that were eligible for listing. And so those are the ones that we would be the most, concerned about or cognizant of. So that's in our system. And then, so if they're similar to the other ones that are on the inventory but maybe haven't been fully surveyed, that's something for the director to basically take a look at and see whether or not we're going to recommend that some additional review process be done.
But I remember that when Commissioner Chahal and I were originally in this committee, that was one of the issues that were raised.
Yeah.
There's no, that what you described is not codified.
Yeah. That's actually a very good point. So unless we add something in here that say that the properties in the permit system, we'd have to think of the language that were initially identified or ones that are similar to those listed on the inventory. I think that's the way, in terms of the materials, the form, the architectural styles, can be considered. We could do something like that.
Okay, so you're gonna before this goes to council, you'll reward.
We could do that, and yeah, I can work with the city attorney to include some clarifying language for that.
Okay, I'd like to see that in the motion that we make. The next question is, so there's a section on ADU, which is under review required for alterations. So which code trumps, this one or the ADU?
This one would, but.
Well, yes, this one prescribes what happens when you have an ADU or a proposed ADU on a historic site. The ADU process is ministerial. We have to respect that under state law. So the furthest we felt we could stick our foot out was to have director-level approval of ADUs that are on historic properties. That being said, if it is a significant property, we allowed for the possibility for full referral to HLC and Architectural Committee. So we're trying to keep it ministerial, but if it is a significant historic site, we allowed for HLC and Architectural Committee approval.
If it's on that list.
Yes.
If it's on the inventory,
If it's on the inventory, we're allowing for, because that's a circumstance where somebody has voluntarily agreed to designate their property as historic. They've taken the initiative to restrict the use of their property. So I think there's some wiggle room as far as, you know, not allowing ADUs by right because they've already voluntarily taken the step of designating their property as historic. I apologize for not being clearer on this, but it's because there's not case law yet, since the accessory dwelling unit law is so new, so nobody knows exactly how far you can stick your foot out on this, but we thought that was the right place to draw the line.
so it's like, let's see what happens, kind of.
To a degree,
Okay,
but
thank you.
we thought that was a reasonable place to
I
put it.
understand. Okay, I don't have any more questions. Any? Okay, Commissioner Chahal.
So while we were working on this ordinance, we had a flow chart for the ease of residents. We have that? Oh, okay, perfect.
We created one,
Created one.
so I have it up here.
Oh, okay,
Well, so at least it shows you the process, like so we will be creating handouts to make this easy for both staff and the public.
perfect. Okay. Good, thanks.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Public hearing?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's getting late. It's getting late. Okay, anyone wants to speak?
I would like to speak as a member of the public. As you probably know, I'm in the process of trying to get a Mills Act for my home, and I've been working with the city, one of the city consultants, a historian, Lori Garcia, and she's told me that the Office of Historic Preservation says that historic surveys need to be updated every 5 years or at least every 10 years. And so I'm curious as to how that works into this ordinance. And then I also have a question about, let's say my house goes on Mills Act, then the homes next to me within 100 feet, what are the limitations for what they can do to their properties?
Okay, to answer your first question on the updating of these surveys, first of all, I did actually speak to the Office of Historic Preservation to clarify that, and that is strictly a recommendation. Now, practically speaking, if you look at how surveys are done, what the survey is going to do is evaluate a structure or property, and what happens is it's determined to be significant on one of 4 areas. It could be architecture, geography, it could be a special event, or there's some other provisions. But the period of significance has to be tied to the structure. So say a house was built in 1880, and so if it's architecture, then it's the embodiment of, say, a Victorian style. Those factors are not going to change. So unless you need a up-to-date survey. Sometimes there's additional changes to the survey form that happen, but the period of significance and when you document that and the structure, that is not going to change. So once it's done thoroughly, there isn't that much need for an update, but we have some surveys that are in a very old format and don't have a lot of information. Now for nomination, we require a complete documentation in the survey form. So again, that's just a recommendation, and we do it, if we don't have a modern survey form, we have that done. Secondly, about what happens within 100 feet. There isn't any restriction necessarily on the properties. What we're looking for is compliance with the single-family design guidelines, but there could be a circumstance where, say, a property is significant that's next to it, and if they're doing something, say, that's out of character with the street or the adjacent neighbor that could potentially impact the significance of that property, that would be changing the context. So if it's residential, say it was actually zoned mixed use and you did commercial and residential, that's a possibility that we'd have to look at some more sensitive way to transition that property. It could be if somebody wanted to do, we had a situation right across from Franklin Square where somebody wanted to do a corrugated metal modern building and tear down a craftsman style but stucco clad building, and it ended up not getting supported. So that would be a situation whereas maybe that building wasn't historic, but the ones next to it were, and so it would change the streetscape of that building. So that would be an inconsistent or incompatible change. That's the control for what that provision is for.
And I would just add, I believe the 100-foot radius referral is only for properties listed on the HRI. It's not for Mills Act properties per se. So if your Mills Act property is also listed on the HRI, it'd be referred, but just being Mills Act does not get a referral.
No, it's for if you're on the inventory.
Right.
Yeah, so it is for every property that's on the inventory.
Right.
That buffer, we would still look at that the addition was sensitive and it was within context of the historic property.
So any Mills Act property automatically doesn't get added to our historical list?
No, it does.
It does.
Yeah,
So-
because it requires nomination
Right.
actually to that inventory before it gets the Mills Act. So those two can happen simultaneously, but the action on the nomination has to happen first.
Anybody else? Okay, motion to close public hearing? Well, somebody needs to make a motion.
Motion to close public hearing? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, any discussions, questions, comments? Motion?
Motion to recommend to the City Council adoption of the Historic Preservation Ordinance as drafted. Second.
I'd like to make a,
Friendly
can I make a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Amendment to add the verbiage on the criteria applied by the Community Development Department on let's see, properties not on the historic, HRI,
For demolition?
right, for demolition.
It's okay.
Thank you,
Second, the revised.
thank you. Okay, any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right.
Thank you
let's-
very much.
Thank you. Let's move to the next item.
Public presentations.
Okay, public presentations. You sure you don't want to be still remain? in the- Okay, you're back on our commission. Thank you. All right.
Reports?
Okay, so we have two items under 8A. Should we announce it?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, these are agenda items that we need to discuss. So would Commissioner O'Halloran first announce item 8AI?
8AI is a request from the commission to recommendation to add a policy to the updated climate action plan that will require all construction of garages on single-family homes to be pre-wired for level 2 electrical vehicle charging.
It's a good idea.
Okay, what are we supposed to do?
So I would like to make a motion that we recommend to council, I guess, to
Oh,
add
okay.
a policy.
Before we do that, can I ask Commissioner Jane to describe what this actually means? Getting something pre-wired for level 2 electrical vehicle charging. What does that mean?
Okay, so what happens is that every house has 220 volts or 240 volts coming into their panel, but in their garage, they often don't have 220 volt outlets. You know, you might have one for your dryer somewhere in your house or maybe your water heater. But in your garage where you might, we're trying to encourage people to get electric cars and to not have the facility to have it wired for 220 can be very expensive after that garage is already constructed. So what we would like to do is when people are reconstructing or building a new home in their garage, that they just have the 220 volts at 30 amps come to some place in the wall. They don't have to install a charger, but it has to just be pre-wired for that.
So level 2 means 220 volt, 30 amp?
Yeah.
And does that support most of the electrical vehicles that are going to be on the
Some go up
market?
to 220 volts, 50 amps, but minimum 30 amps.
Like a charging station you see on a commercial parking lot?
Yeah.
What do they do?
They're 220 volts at either 30 amps or 50 amps.
So 220 volt, 30 amp is a very high quality
Yeah, yeah.
wiring. Okay. I don't have any questions. Anybody else?
When you say
Commissioner
new
O'Halloran.
construction, is that a brand-new garage?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
New construction garages, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
So I would like to make a motion that this body recommend to City Council that the Climate Action Plan be updated to require all new construction of garages on single-family homes to be pre-wired for level 2 electric vehicle charging.
Second.
Okay, any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, if I may make a suggestion, when you include this in the minutes, maybe you can mention about 220 volt, 30 amp, and how it's comparable to the chargers you see on the commercial lot, so that people who see it will understand what level 2 means. Thank you. Okay, next item, requests. Oh, would you like to announce?
Is the request from the commission to remove the general plan recommendation that on-street parking on El Camino Real be preserved / encouraged. Remove that provision.
Remove it.
Remove the general plan recommendation.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay, this
Do you
was
want me
also
to-
proposed by Commissioner James, so would he like to talk to this
Yeah, so
proposal?
in the general plan, item 5.4.1-P13 says, encourage the retention of on-street parking, particularly adjacent to community mixed-use designated properties. And I was informed of this by former assistant manager or former manager of community development, Lee Butler, and he said, I came across this policy on the ECR focus area section of the general plan. So, so he shared that with me, and so I would like to remove that restriction on
Is
El
that
Camino
something
Real.
that's- I'm sorry. I'm
So
just wondering when we're talking about the El Camino Real specific plan, would that be an item that would be addressed in that new plan?
I would, certainly if it were in there, then that's an update to the general plan. So if it got into the specific area plan, it would automatically be part of the general plan.
I'm kind of reluctant to change the general plan.
So I'm not following this. So what's the reasoning behind your request?
So the idea is that eventually I would like to see bicycle lanes on El Camino. And right now, with all the car parking there, it's consuming space for bikes. So if we got rid of the car parking, then we could run bike lanes on El Camino. Because we're trying to get this Grand Boulevard idea with bicycles to all of these, restaurants that we're trying to build on El Camino. So other cities have adopted similar policies.
You're
to-
really
to
just
put
saying,
bike
you
lanes.
don't want the wording that says we're going to encourage it.
That's right. I want to get rid of the wording saying encourage it.
I understand what you just said, but what about, people who run stores and restaurants and who want people to be able to just pull up to in
So,
front of their stores and pick up something and go?
so, of course, we have, this traffic is a huge problem in the city. And by getting rid of the on-street parking, we can actually reduce the traffic. Okay, now, the survey that was done during the bus rapid transit analysis by VTA said that there is actually plenty of off-street parking. So these are the private parking lots of the commercial establishments and the side roads. So you don't need to have, there's plenty of supply off of the El Camino that you don't have to have parking on the El Camino, okay? Now, certainly it's more convenient to just pull up in front of a business and go in. But unfortunately, as the city gets more and more congested, we have to start modifying our transit to encourage more biking and walking. And this would allow us to possibly get wider sidewalks and, this Grand Boulevard type concept. Wider sidewalks, more street trees, and biking.
Yeah, for BRT.
So it's just, I had asked about this before for other projects to try to remove the parking on El Camino, and Lee had told me that, well, the general plan says that we're actually encouraging this, and I would like to remove that wording to say that we're not going to encourage it. Perhaps we want to discourage it.
I'd like to ask the staff, are we making any update to the general plan on the El Camino area?
Yeah, I think both of these, just to keep in mind, we can note them in the minutes, but they were going to be taking up, one is, the first item is when we do the climate action plan update, which we're going through now, that will be folded into that for council's consideration. And then the general plan amendment, if that language were to change, it would require a general plan text amendment, but also that can be considered as part of the comments for the specific
right.
plan.
That's right.
But those would be raised on a council agenda that we made that recommendation.
Yeah, well, it'll be in your minutes, but then when the specific plan comes through, that will be one of the comments. Let me know if you want to make that comment as a body.
So in other words, instead of addressing this specific issue, this will be considered as a part of a more general update to the,
Yes,
when the
because,
time comes to make the general plan update, this will
Yes.
be incorporated into one of the proposed changes.
yes, because it's been adopted as part of the general plan. It's in there, so it would require a general plan text amendment. So either we completely update, when we go through and update the general plan, or it's going to be, it'll include it in the specific plan. It would say everyone did support this, they would strike out that language essentially as part of the specific plan.
And that'll be coming before you within the next year.
Yeah,
The El
it will.
Camino specific plan will come to this body.
Can I write that down?
So we'll,
Sure do.
would Commissioner,
Might be a little longer
would
than a
Commissioner
year.
Jane like to keep track of this issue so that,
Well, yeah.
this will be,
Can I?
addressed at the
John Davidson
appropriate-
John Davidson and Anna McGill are, and so all of these comments are being put into the project file, and so they're all being considered. So those issues would be raised during the specific plan process, the outreach process, to
Okay,
get
thank you.
feedback. But
Thank you.
definitely that, if you want to make that as a recommendation as a body, you could wait till your other members are here, or if you want to make that recommendation now, if you feel you have enough information, you could act on it. Or you want to, you can continue to discuss it and get feedback. We can bring back information from the traffic engineer for you about what that means.
Okay, okay. Commissioner Chahal?
Yeah. So just a clarification. So the purpose of this is to discourage, but not to stop it.
Correct.
So people will still be able to have a parking over there, but proactively encouragement is being discouraged.
Yes, I mean, I would like for like all new developments on
Okay.
El Camino to have this prohibition. I don't want to take it away from people
Who
that
already have
are,
it.
that who
Grandparenting
already have it. Yeah,
still
yeah,
remains,
yeah,
okay. So
exactly.
any future new use, they should completely eliminate that. That's what you're trying.
That's correct.
So this one is only basically taking out, we don't encourage it.
That's
But we are nowhere putting it out, okay. So your motion, if I understand right, for any new development along El Camino Real, it should not be allowed. That's what your purpose is.
That's my ideal.
So that's
Yes.
what, so that's why I'm a bit confused about which two things. Are we doing this as well as that?
I
or-
didn't want to take the further step to say that we want to disallow it, okay? But that's really where I'm going.
But right now, you're only saying don't encourage it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Take it out so that if somebody reads, he's not encouraged to park over there or provide a parking over
Yeah,
there.
that's right. Yeah.
My question is what staff had just said as to what it is that satisfactory? Does that get you far enough? Because all it sounds like is just in our minutes to be considered when they do the specific plan.
Well, I think, you know, it
Sounds like you want to go
becomes,
further than that.
it basically becomes part of the official consideration for the updates to the climate action plan and to the specific plan for El Camino. So it's just part of the formal process of getting into there.
Is there any way we can document this in our minutes then?
Yes, and I think we should refer to, basically say that the recommendation would be to remove general plan policy, whatever number it is, that state, stating, and just say what the policy is, and just say recommend removing this in the next general plan update. And in the meantime, you could always continue to recommend it and make as part of your recommendation on projects.
Okay, thank you. Would somebody like to make a motion then? Oh, well, I guess firstly, I support what the staff
I guess,
recommends. Instead of suggesting a change to the general plan here now to
Motion to recommend.
have this incorporated as
Well,
one of the
I
suggestions.
guess we're not recommending to council, we're recommending to staff to make this part of the
It depends if you
writing of
want,
the.
for purposes of the minutes, do you want to say that you want council to know that that you would like to have policy, say, GP policy P3, whatever it is, removed on the next general plan update, and as part of the El Camino Real specific plan, we can make that language in your minutes.
That's what I would like, exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
And then we can also refer it to the El Camino Real specific plan project,
Correct.
project team for their consideration.
That's exactly what I want, yeah.
Okay, would Commissioner Jane like to state the motion?
Okay. I would like for minutes that go to council to reflect our desire to remove item 5.4.1-P13 from the general plan in the next general plan update, and also to remove that item when we do the El Camino Real specific area plan, and that this information be conveyed to the project lead for the El Camino Real specific plan. And that would be this item that relates to currently to encouraging retention of on-street parking. Is that sufficient?
Could you repeat the last part you said
Oh,
about?
I'm just saying that this, what is it called, a code item, or what's it?
It would be a policy.
This policy in the general plan states that currently we're encouraging retention of on-street parking, and we want to remove that.
Yeah.
I was just clarifying what the number meant. Yeah. So policy 5.4.1-P13 should be removed.
Yeah, right, from the general plan, because that's where it's at.
Would Commissioner Jane also like to include in the motion the reason why you like to get this removed so that the person who reads it will know?
Sure. As we are moving towards a Grand Boulevard vision for El Camino Real, which encourages 10-foot wide sidewalks, lots of walking, street trees, and biking, removing parking on El Camino will facilitate that vision.
Okay, any seconds?
Second.
Okay, any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I believe Commissioner Jane had wished to make another motion to add something to the next meeting?
Yes, I do. So on the same lines, I had two more recommendations that we should consider at the September 27th meeting. The first is we currently have these iPads, and we do actually have city emails, city email addresses, but we're not on the Exchange server, so we can't conveniently retrieve those emails. And in the vein of open government, I would like for all commissioners, like council members, to start using official city-provided email addresses for all official business.
Now, is each commissioner going to have his or her own email address, or is it going to be one planning commission
No,
at Santa
each
Clara?
commissioner would have their own email address. It would be like sudsjane@santaclaraca.gov.
Okay.
And
what
will we have
does-
the option to forward those emails to an email address that we actually look at on a regular
Yes,
basis?
yes, of course. It would be an exchange, just like council members and staff have, official email exchange services, and you could forward and put vacation notices and whatever you want in there. But it's just that every time we get, this is part of open government, we will get contacted by developers and residences on our personal email addresses, and the city has no record of that. So by doing so, the city would have a record of all the communications between us and developers and residences.
Any second for that motion?
Just need to bring it to agenda.
Yeah,
To
we're
agendize.
just, the motion is added to the next month,
is that
next agenda.
Yep. So I need if you reply through that email, which has a domain of city, like when I reply from my personal email for any planning commission, it's not under city umbrella. Is city liable for anything I
Excuse me,
write?
Commissioner Chahal, that's something that, we're just talking about adding it to the agenda, so
Okay.
maybe those are the questions we can raise if we add this to the agenda at the next meeting.
I'm very surprised you don't already have such email addresses, so I certainly am in support of putting it on the next agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, any
I have-
seconds?
Okay, so we have to vote to put it on the agenda, is that correct?
Right, any seconds?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, next motion.
Okay,
or
so
next-
I have
next
one
proposal.
more on the same lines. I'm proposing to city council, the history behind this is historically, Architectural Review Committee had an architect who would volunteer and provide professional advice on aesthetics and so on of developments. And currently, my being on architecture review provides no aesthetic input to any of the projects. So I would like to recommend that we go back to a former policy of trying to recruit architects, unpaid or paid, to advise at architectural review committees on aesthetics of projects.
But we have staff.
But you have staff.
But apparently, well, I don't know. In the past, Rob Mayer said that this was a very useful, he was serving on that. And, but staff, I'm sorry, I don't know this, Gloria. Are you an architect?
No, I am not. I do have a design background, a fine arts
Okay.
background. But I think it's better to bring it up to the architectural committee because you have a council member there. And I believe that committee can set its own policy. If it wants to hire one, it can do that.
I see. Okay, I'll just wait till
Yeah.
AC.
Do we need to add that to the ARC agenda
Yeah, we can do that.
at the next meeting, ARC meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
I think,
Okay.
So,
yeah, if it hasn't been published yet, otherwise we can add
no,
it.
it's already been published, I already saw it.
I already
Oh.
got the email, right?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe at the next meeting.
We could bring it up to add to the following agenda then.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. All right, so
Okay.
would Commissioner Jane like to withdraw that motion then? Oh, he hasn't put the motion in.
yeah.
Okay, so,
So-
are we-
I have an announcement, sorry. Can I do an announcement at this
oh,
time?
yeah, right, okay, sure.
Okay, so there is a nonprofit called the Greenbelt Alliance, and they have organized these walking tours on the El Camino Real, and actually some planning staff have already attended some of these. So I would just like for the public to know that there are these walking tours. They're free. You can go to a website and sign up. Tomorrow night, I'll be leading one from San Tomas to Expressway to Lincoln Street on El Camino. They're all on the El Camino Real. The purpose is to vision what El Camino could be and to talk about placemaking and concepts of how to improve El Camino Real. But they are on, there was one on the 11th, there's one on the 14th, the 17th, the 19th, the 20th, the 22nd, and the 23rd. So a couple are on weekends. So if anyone wants a flyer, you go to a website, there's a website at the bottom here.
Maybe you'd like to announce
And,
it since,
yeah, if you want to sign up, you can go to tinyurl.com/Santa Clara Walks.
thank you. Okay, no board or committee assignments. ARC or architectural committee, nothing. Okay, we have an item up on D. So would Commissioner O'Halloran like to announce item 8DI?
I'm not sure exactly how to announce it, but it's a request to authorize to expend $500 for travel expenses incurred for presentation and training session by Transform at the September 27th Planning Commission meeting.
Okay. So this was an item added to the agenda by the staff?
No,
Would you like some
sure, sure. Yeah,
background on this?
Who made, who?
This is me. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So I attend these Grand Boulevard Initiative meetings. They're once a month. And a couple of meetings ago, someone from Transform came and presented on this software called Green Trips Connect. And what it does is actually you put in a development into a location along El Camino, and you can say how many residences are there, how many cars are going to be there, and it will actually analyze traffic for you. So it's a way to plan development on El Camino Real. You can just put in hypothetical projects and look at traffic impacts. And so I thought it was a very interesting presentation, and so I would like for a person from Transform to come to the Planning Commission and speak to the public about how to plan for traffic. And so this person for Transform has to travel here, and so I would like to authorize $500 to pay for the training. So they would come here and they would present to train us on this tool.
So we don't
So-
need hexagon studies?
That was exactly my question. How is this going to be meshed with the EIR that we get the city commissions?
It doesn't mesh with the EIRs. It would just help us understand how traffic is analyzed. For example, Commissioner Chahal's question today is, how could LOS go down when you have a lot more cars?
So
And so,
EIR, LOS is calculated based on specific methodology, I understand, which is part of the
it's a state
CEQA
methodology, yeah.
requirements. So is Green Trip software, does that comply with the CEQA requirements too? And I also understand that the LOS is going away and another methodology is going to take over.
Yeah, they will probably, I mean, they do explain why LOS is going away. And the simple answer is, if you are going, like downtown Willow Glen, right? You're not going to be traveling very fast. Your delays are long. But the businesses want you to be slow. They want you to, watch the restaurants there. So the point is not to get people through these commercial zones as fast as possible, right? You want to slow people down to have this. So LOS doesn't apply to areas where you actually want to have a thriving restaurant scene.
I think the other reason LOS is going is because everything is going beyond D. So you have to come up with a new criteria now.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
all right, let's try to stick to the subject here. So do we want to have this, is this relevant to what the kind of discussions we have at the Planning Commission? How is?
I think I think as you saw today, traffic is a big deal for residents. And it's important I believe, for us to educate the residents about how traffic is handled. So I would like there to be a community outreach to invite as many people to this training as possible.
I think what I can suggest is all of us can go to their website. And because right now I don't know what they do basically, other than your briefing. And we can bring it back after we all educate ourselves, what does the Transform do? And then we can find out about this.
But I think we've already scheduled them for the 27th, is that correct?
We have?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I've already advertised it.
They needed a lot of lead time, so I thought, yeah.
So-
I didn't
so-
realize they charged a fee, so then actually they requested a $1,500 stipend. So we didn't do that, but they have the alternative, which is because they're a nonprofit, is a $500 travel expense, so.
So does planning department has some budget to accommodate such visits?
Yeah, I mean, they're,
Well,
Other than us
Planning-
approve?
Planning Commission has a budget.
No, I'm asking the department, not the planning commission budget is separate. Like, right, last year we ran out of our budget and we didn't even, I didn't even apply for my trip yet. Yeah, and
I only got part.
Steve only got part of it. So what I'm saying is, does the department have some other budget where this can be accommodated? No, okay.
So it's going to come out of the Planning Commission budget, okay.
right, that's the request.
Where do we stand that budget? Because it goes July, June?
Yeah, you just got your new budget, so this has to go to June 30th.
Is that a motion then?
Okay, is there a motion?
I would like to move that we approve to spend $500 from our budget to invite Transform to talk about green trips.
Second?
I'll second that motion.
Discussions?
How long is the presentation?
It could be an hour. I mean, it depends on what we're willing to tolerate, yeah.
And is
Well,
this,
do you also want to know, it sounds like you also want to make it a public
light.
presentation.
I do want to make it for the public. I want to invite the public and publicize it.
so where on the agenda is this going to be placed?
I think it should be placed early.
It's gonna be early. I think we only have one other item besides that, so that there's not a.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is going to be maybe under item 8 then?
No, it needs to be at the,
Or under public presentation?
Oh,
Oh, wait, I take it back.
we need to make a
Steve's telling
motion
me-
to continue.
I'm sorry, Steve's telling me we actually have more items. I guess that when I was out for a week, a lot happened, so. We could do it at 6 o'clock if that's acceptable, because it was supposed to be about an hour. So we
Okay.
could do it earlier.
Okay.
As a study session or something.
Okay, so I'm feeling a little conflicted because we did say that on days where we have lighter agenda, that we like to do additional training, but has Transform been vetted by the staff?
yeah, I know
Okay.
they're a very reliable group.
Okay, all right. So we're talking about meeting at 6 o'clock, so would you like to amend the motion then?
Yeah, I don't know why we would need to, if we only have one item, I don't know why we.
Well,
No, we're going
apparently
to have
we
more
don't.
than one item.
Oh,
Okay, so I would like to recommend that we have our September 27th meeting start at 6 o'clock, and that we invite Transform to speak for about an hour on the Green Trips program and concepts of transit demand management and LOS and VMT to educate us and the public on some of these concepts. And then we'll be starting early at 6 o'clock.
And approve $500.
Oh, and I propose that we spend $500 to compensate them for travel and training expenses.
Any second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any more discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, item number 9. Upcoming agenda item, city council actions. None.
So
Yes,
September 27th, we have Chick-fil-A, new drive-through. We have 1075 Pomeroy, which is a revised proposal, was denied at 5 units, it's coming back as 4 units, correct? And city council actions, the only one of significance is that Prometheus proposed, it went through the early consideration process for a general plan amendment on the Moonlight bowling alley site, and as you know, it was, they withdrew their application, and they're resubmitting for 58 unit townhouse project. So that was submitted to council, and they supported continuation of processing the general plan amendment.
It'll still come to the planning commission.
Well, it'll go through the review process through us, but I believe it still can't go forward until after all the visioning for the El Camino Real specific plan is finished.
But
Thank
it will
you.
come through planning
Some
after
point.
that?
okay, thank you very much. All right, any more items? Nothing? Motion to adjourn?
So,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much. Wow, that was a long meeting.
Do you know when the historic preservation ordinance is planning on going to council?
I don't think we have a date yet on the agenda.